filming, made this video, and then I approached Riley with it, and I was like, I really want to put it on YouTube and see what happens. And he was like, no, I don't want to be on the internet. That's weird.
It started with the video. He said, I told Riley I wanted to put it on YouTube. And Riley's response, no way. I don't want to be on the internet. That's weird. That's how their incredible journey began. Now, after 11 years at sea and nearly 2 million subscribers and 3 different boats carrying them across every ocean on Earth, Riley and Elena from Sailing La Vagabond have dropped a bombshell. They're selling their iconic, custom-built $2 million Rapido 60 Trimaran. Making this announcement was agonizing. Behind the scenes, they constantly stopped the camera, second-guessing themselves, weighing the pros and cons of walking away from their entire way of life. This is the boat they waited years for, raised their kids on, and sailed everywhere from Southeast Asia to Japan and Micronesia. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. They aren't upgrading. They aren't buying a bigger boat. For the first time in over a decade, they are officially stepping away from the water. And this decision didn't come from a quiet conversation about finances or a desire for a lifestyle change. It was triggered by a terrifying, life-altering moment at 2:40 in the morning off the coast of Japan. It was November 4th, 2024. They were anchored near Shotoshima Island, the water dead calm, barely a ripple. 6-year-old Lenny and 3-year-old Darwin were fast asleep. Riley was out cold. Elena had just settled in, though she later admitted to an eerie, lingering feeling that something bad was about to happen. Suddenly, something slammed into the side of their floating home with enough force to crack the boat's actual skeleton. In the immediate chaos, Riley thought a massive cargo ship had T-boned them. Elena thought they had run aground. The impact was so violent it felt like they were caught up in something huge, twisting the boat around and threatening to suck them entirely underwater. What happened that night in the dark and the trauma it triggered in the months that followed changes everything you think you know about their story. Their world literally cracked open. A 70-year-old fishing captain heading out of the Shikai fishing port for a night of bottom trawl fishing drove his vessel straight into one of the Trimaran's floats. The sound was sickening. It was the horrific noise of carbon fiber flexing and snapping, paired with the deep structural groan of a 60-foot boat absorbing a massive blow it was never designed to take. The entire vessel violently lurched sideways, sending gear crashing off the shelves, and instantly the boys woke up screaming. Riley was on his feet before his brain was even fully conscious. Heart hammering, he sprinted barefoot across the tilted deck. His first instinct wasn't to check on his $2 million boat, it was the kids. He found them terrified and shaking, but unharmed. Meanwhile, Elena was already up in the dark, her hands desperately running along the interior walls to check for water pouring in. Thankfully, there was no breach and no flooding, but they could feel that something was deeply, structurally wrong. In the gray beam of a flashlight, they finally saw it. A massive crack running straight through the forward beam, right at the joint where the structural box meets the fairing. The immense force of the fishing boat had flexed the beam sideways, putting devastating shear stress on one of the most critical structural connections of the entire Trimaran. Elena later recalled, I was really scared. I had no idea what was going on. The boat is cracking, and I was really scared. Miraculously, all 7 people on board walked away without a single scratch. But Riley would later confess to his Patreon supporters that this terrifying night was the absolute most harrowing ordeal of their entire lives. And what happened next? Nobody saw it coming. To truly understand why selling this boat is such a massive deal, you have to look at where this family started. It all began with a guy who literally did not know how to sail. Riley Whitelam didn't come from a sailing family, and he certainly didn't have a trust fund. He grew up in Cowell, a tiny town in South Australia. After grinding away for 4 years in mining and offshore drilling, he managed to save about 100,000 Australian dollars. In 2013, he took that money and bought a 43-foot Beneteau Cyclades monohull in Italy. Let that sink in for a second. He bought a sailboat in the Mediterranean, having barely ever set foot on one, teaching himself the basics by reading books and watching YouTube tutorials. Eventually, he managed to sail his way to Greece, which is where he met a 21-year-old Elena Carouso on the island of Ios. She was working as a musician, playing guitar in local bars. Riley was 30, possessed a boat, and had a life plan that was entirely improvised. She climbed aboard, and honestly, neither of them ever really climbed off. But here's the catch. Those early days weren't the glamorous, sun-kissed Instagram montages we see today. It was pure survival. They nearly got obliterated by a cargo ship because they forgot to turn on their radar, and they dragged their anchor during a terrifying midnight storm. In fact, their very first maiden voyage from Turkey to Greece was essentially a crash course in every single thing that can go wrong on the water. But absolutely nothing could have prepared them for the night they nearly lost everything. Somewhere out in the open water, well after dark, a mysterious powerboat crept up behind them. It had no running lights and wouldn't respond to the radio, just the menacing growl of an engine accelerating straight toward them. Riley frantically tried hailing them on the VHF. Dead silence. He flashed a spotlight into the dark. Still nothing. The boat just kept closing the distance. Elena's face went completely white. At this point, it was just the two of them, out there. No kids yet, no crew, and absolutely no weapons. Terrified, she retreated into the aft cabin, locked the door, pressed herself against the hull, and just listened. Up on deck, Riley stood completely alone. The Monohull was pitching violently in the ocean swells, the rigging groaning in the wind, and all he could hear was that engine getting louder and louder. With no flare gun or actual weapons on board, he did the only thing he could think of. He sprinted to the galley, grabbed armfuls of tinned food, and started hurling them into the dark. Cans of beans and diced tomatoes became his ammunition, thrown with everything he had at a vessel he could barely see. He aimed blindly at the roar of the engine, listening for the clang of metal on fiberglass and the heavy thud of aluminum hitting something solid. He didn't stop. He just kept throwing until suddenly the powerboat cut its engine and vanished back into the pitch-black night. There was no explanation, no follow-up. Just a massive crash of adrenaline, dented cans rolling across the tilted deck, and two people staring at each other through the companionway in the kind of stunned silence that only hits when you genuinely believed you were about to die. Looking back at the brutal reality of those early damaging crossings, Riley would later reflect that pushing through the fear was the hardest thing he had ever done, but also the thing he was most proud of. They survived, they kept sailing, and they kept filming. Within just a few years, Sailing Na Vagabond exploded into the most popular sailing channel on YouTube, racking up nearly 2 million subscribers, over 470 million views, and a massive Patreon community. But what most casual viewers don't realize is that every major chapter of their lives has been defined by a specific boat, and every massive life transition has been marked by selling one. The original Monohull was their origin story. It took them from Europe to Africa, across the Atlantic, and through the Caribbean into the Pacific. It was the era of two people who had absolutely no idea what they were doing, figuring it out on camera, which is exactly why the internet fell in love with them in the first place. Then came La Vagabond II in 2017, a sleek Outremer 45 catamaran. This is where everything shifted, because this boat wasn't just a vessel to explore the world in, it became a floating nursery. Their first son, Lenny, was born in December 2018 while they were cruising the Caribbean, allowing their audience to watch these two wild adventurers become parents in real time. A year later, in November 2019, they famously sailed climate activist Greta Thunberg across the ocean to the UN Climate Change Conference in Lisbon, putting their names in global newspaper headlines. By the time their second son, Darwin, arrived in Australia in June 2021, he was out on the water within weeks. And then, after outgrowing the catamaran, came the big one, La Vagabond III. Enter La Vagabond III. A 60-foot carbon fiber Rapido 60 Trimaran designed by the legendary Morelli and Melvin. This was their most advanced, most expensive, and most ambitious boat ever. It was the absolute dream vessel Riley had been obsessing over ever since he test sailed one in New Zealand back in December 2019 and fell completely in love with its sheer speed. So, here is the deal. Every boat represented a specific chapter of their lives. The monohull was pure curiosity. The catamaran was all about family. This trimaran, it was supposed to be their forever future. But now, that future is sitting on the market as $2 million of pure limbo. But you don't just abruptly walk away from a machine like this. To truly grasp why this decision is so heavy, you have to understand what this boat actually cost them. And I'm not just talking about the money. I'm talking about years of their lives. Riley and Elena put their first deposit down with Rapido Trimarans on May 23, 2021. The catch was that the boat was being built in Vietnam. That meant uprooting their entire family, 2 adults, a toddler, and a literal newborn, just so they could oversee the process. Imagine living out of suitcases in a foreign country with a baby who is only weeks old, waiting on a boat that wouldn't be finished for over 2 years. Every single day, they watched their future home get pieced together, knowing that every delay meant another grueling month of limbo. It meant another month of not sailing, draining their savings, and having to explain to nearly 2 million YouTube subscribers why they were still stuck on land. Riley compared the process to building a house, noting that roughly 40,000 hours of intense labor went into its creation. And unlike buying a car off a lot, you can't just walk away when the build gets tough. They were committed financially, emotionally, and entirely publicly. Every setback and every frustration played out on camera for an audience that had opinions about absolutely everything. Finally, 2 years and 5 months after that initial deposit, the boat launched on October 13, 2023. But even with the boat in the water, the anxiety wasn't over. One massive fear had been gnawing at Riley the entire time: the weight. For a performance multi-hull, weight is everything. If it's too heavy, the boat becomes sluggish and loses the exact speed advantage that made it worth building in the first place. What kept Riley up at night was that the boat wasn't actually weighed at delivery in Vietnam. He had no idea if the final number would match the design specs, and the hardcore sailing community was watching closely, with critics already speculating. It wasn't until they finally sailed to Japan that the trimaran was put on a proper scale. The result? 11.8 tons. Right on target. For Riley, it was ultimate vindication. Every expensive upgrade, every custom tweak, and every agonizing decision hadn't compromised the vessel one bit. The Rapido 60 performed exactly as promised, and he proudly stated publicly that he'd recommend the builders to anyone. And honestly, that is exactly what makes this sail so incredibly complicated. The boat didn't fail, it's not broken, and it's certainly not a lemon. They poured approximately $2.1 million into the base price, upgrades, and sponsored gear to create a flawless, world-class machine. And the boat earned every single cent of that $2 million price tag. But here is the catch. A vessel that demands absolutely everything from you only works if you are actually there to give it everything. And that is exactly where the story cracks. So why sell a pristine, perfectly functioning $2 million dreamboat? The answer is a lot quieter than you might expect. There's no massive scandal, no hidden bankruptcy, and no secret feud. It's just life doing what life does, changing when you aren't looking. Riley and Elena simply don't live on the boat full-time anymore. Their boys, Lenny and Darwin, now 7 and 4, actually attend school for parts of the year. During those long stretches on land, La Vagabond III sits alone at anchor or tied up in a marina, burning through money and aging without anyone aboard to care for her. As Riley bluntly explained, the decision ultimately comes down to finances and practicality. They just don't want a multi-million-dollar asset sitting empty. The Rapido 60 isn't the kind of boat you can just park and forget about. It requires someone living aboard, giving it constant attention, ongoing maintenance, and active monitoring. If you leave a high-performance machine like that unattended for weeks, you aren't just wasting money, you are actively risking serious damage. Elena put it perfectly. The boat is flawless, but it can start to feel like a cage when it demands more from you than your current season of life can actually give you. Riley lays out the math without flinching. They have $2.1 million invested in a boat that now sits unused for months at a time. The numbers just don't lie. But here's what most people are missing. This is not a forced sale. They aren't desperate and they aren't bleeding dry. If the market doesn't meet their valuation, they'll just keep it. They're making a conscious choice. And somehow, that makes the decision feel so much heavier. A desperate, forced sale is easy to explain away. A deliberate one means you're actively choosing to let go of something you deeply love.
Now, the couple hasn't officially pointed to the horrific Japan collision as the primary reason for selling, and that is completely fair. But here is what we know about human nature. When you are violently jolted awake by a massive crash in the pitch black, when your toddler is screaming in the dark, when you shine a flashlight and see a literal crack running through the skeleton of the only home your children have ever known, that kind of trauma doesn't just evaporate the second the insurance check clears. After the collision, the Trimaran had to be hauled ashore for a grueling, full structural assessment. There were terrifying concerns about hidden, microscopic damage, the kind that only high-tech ultrasound scans could detect. Pete Melvin, the naval architect who literally co-designed the Rapido 60, had to review Coast Guard photographs just to determine if the damage was even repairable. And while he confirmed it could be fixed, repairable and the same are two very different words. The family spent agonizing weeks completely grounded in Japan. They had to navigate a mountain of insurance paperwork and deal with local Coast Guard bureaucracy, a process so notoriously grueling that sailors in Japan actually have a saying: no matter what happens, don't call the Coast Guard. They had to sit there and watch their highly anticipated sailing season completely evaporate while their dreamboat sat on dry land with a cracked beam. Elena later admitted that they had renewed their insurance just in the nick of time, and the mere thought of what would have happened if they hadn't was enough to make her stomach turn. Here is the truth that doesn't make it into the glossy YouTube thumbnails. After the complex repairs were finished, after the boat went safely back into the water, and after everything was technically structurally fixed, the feeling still didn't go away. Because you can repair carbon fiber, you can fill the cracks, pass the safety inspections, and get the ultimate green light to sail again. But you absolutely cannot unhear the sickening sound of your home breaking apart at 2:40 in the morning. You cannot unsee the sheer terror on your children's faces in the dark. Riley himself called it the most harrowing ordeal of their entire lives. And then, months later, he sat down in front of a camera and said the 5 words that changed everything. We are selling our boat. Picture this. You are sitting across from the person you have spent the last 11 years sailing the world with. Your kids are playing in the next room. You can hear the water lapping against the hull beneath you. The boat is floating peacefully. The exact same boat you designed, waited years for, moved your family across the world to build, and defended against every online critic who insisted a Trimaran was the wrong choice for a young family. And one of you has to say it first. The room goes quiet. It is not the comfortable kind of quiet either. It is the kind where you can hear your own breathing, and you know the very next sentence out of someone's mouth is going to change absolutely everything. Maybe the thought has been shared before in scattered pieces, half arguments, or late-night whispers. But this time is different. This time, they aren't just floating the idea. They are landing on it. We should sell the boat.
Riley describes this period as mentally and emotionally exhausting. The second guessing was constant, not just for days, but for weeks and months. It was the crushing anxiety of making the wrong call, of waking up in 6 months, standing on some piece of dirt, looking out at the horizon, and realizing you just gave away the best thing you ever had. He doesn't sugarcoat it. He readily admits he doesn't even know if it is the right decision, and he says that out loud on camera to nearly 2 million people. That takes a very specific kind of bravery that most people will never have to demonstrate. Elena goes even further, admitting that the entire process left her emotionally unstable. She describes a paradox that sounds almost cruel, feeling like they had finally arrived and achieved everything they set out to do, but simultaneously needing to blow it all up. She needed to change direction just to shake something loose inside her that had been feeling entirely stuck. And she is incredibly honest about the negativity too. While the vast majority of their audience is overwhelmingly supportive, the critical voices are always there. When you are already doubting yourself, those voices don't just stay in the YouTube comment section. They follow you into the cabin at night. In their announcement video, Elena looks dead into the camera and delivers it completely flat. We're selling our boat. There is no grand build-up and no PR spin. Riley follows up by calling Vagabond III both a beauty and a beast, noting how deeply it became part of their family. Watching him, you don't see a man who feels instantly free. You see a man standing at the absolute edge of something, completely unsure if the ground on the other side is actually solid. The boat is officially listed. Anyone interested can reach out by email. And just like that, an era has an expiration date. So here is the question everyone is asking. Is this the end? No. But it is certainly not a clean beginning either. It is something a whole lot messier than that. Riley and Elena say they want to build an off-grid farm. They are looking for a piece of land with animals and a garden where the boys can have space to run that doesn't constantly pitch with the ocean swells. The catch? They haven't chosen a country, and they haven't picked the land. They're actually asking their own audience for advice on where to settle and how to build. Going off-grid with two kids who have spent most of their lives on salt water is way outside of their skill set. But as they put it, that is exactly why it is next on their list of challenges and dreams. And they're not giving up the water entirely. They say they will keep sailing, but the next boat won't be anything like this one. Not even close. Elena described their future vessel in terms that would make any hardcore performance sailor wince. An old wooden boat. Maybe a trawler. Just something simple. Something you don't lose sleep over, and something that doesn't demand your entire life just to keep it afloat.
They estimate they have about 6 weeks left aboard Vagabond III. 6 weeks to say a final goodbye to the spectacular machine they built from nothing but a dream and a deposit. Riley casually joked that it might look like a step backward to the rest of the world, but to them it's just a jump to the left. It is a charming, lighthearted line, but it doesn't quite cover the sheer weight of what is actually happening. Because the truth is, Riley and Elena are doing something that almost nobody in their position ever does. They're actively walking away from a $2 million machine that works flawlessly. They are abandoning a lifestyle that millions of people fantasize about. They are closing the door on the exact version of their lives that made them famous in the first place. And they are doing it all without a rock-solid plan for what comes next. After a month and a half, it will be dirt under their feet, morning school runs, and the sharp thud of a screen door instead of a halyard clanging against a carbon mast. Somewhere out there, Vagabond III will eventually belong to someone else. It will go to someone who will marvel at the carbon construction, the jaw-dropping speed, and the clean lines. Someone who doesn't know what it sounds like at 2:40 in the morning when the world violently crashes into the side of your home and your children scream in the dark. Riley and Elena know that sound, and they will carry it with them wherever they go. They will take it onto the farm, onto the trawler, and into whatever wild chapter comes next. The one question that nobody can answer yet, not even them, is whether leaving the deep water behind will finally feel like the freedom they are looking for, or if it will be the one thing they spend the rest of their lives trying to sail back to. If you found this story compelling, share this episode with someone who might appreciate it.